Hello and welcome back to another video. Today we're looking at a new interview that was posted a few days ago, actually on July the 8th, 2025. This is related to the Anime Expo 2025 that you may have seen a live stream of, where Yoshi, the producer and director of Final Fantasy XIV as well as Final Fantasy XVI, was on stage talking about his previous inspirations, be that toys, video games, and lots of things like that. There wasn't really too much to talk about from the Anime Expo itself, because it was a little bit just kind of, you know, his biography, things that make Yoshi P who he is. But this is the first of a few interviews that I've seen being posted. This then on Animenewsnetwork by George Lang. You can find the link in the description to this article, which features the full interview. We're going to look at this today and react to it and talk about it, and basically just give you something to listen to if you're in a car journey or you want to just have somebody read this out whilst you play some video games. So let's talk about this then. So the interview did take place at Anime Expo 2025. And the first question that George Lang poses to Yoshi P is, with the recent release of Final Fantasy XVI on Xbox and the launch of the Switch 2, have Square Enix's future launch plans changed? Final Fantasy XVI was a launch exclusive on PS5, so will you go fully multi-platform for future Final Fantasy titles? This is a big question, which most of us know the answer to now, but Yoshi P says, for sure. This was also announced by our president and CEO, Takashi Kiryu. Our Square Enix strategy is that we want to go fully multi-platform for our future titles. As you have seen in terms of titles released from our Creative Studio 3, we announced that Final Fantasy Tactics Ivalice Chronicles will be releasing on September the 30th multi-platform. I personally can't wait for that. It is safe to assume that we will strive for multi-platform release moving forward, end quote. So any games that you could probably imagine that might come out of this, I don't know if that also counts games that they'd planned prior to, you know, that announcement, should be multi-platform. So it'll be interesting to see the likes of Final Fantasy games and Kingdom Hearts games being pushed onto more platforms. It is interesting how the Switch 2 part of that question wasn't necessarily dodged, but kind of ignored. I personally think that it's only a matter of time before the Switch 2 gets Final Fantasy XIV. I think that that's kind of a no-brainer to make more money, to bring more people in to obviously playing Final Fantasy XIV. They had the Xbox release of that. It wouldn't surprise me with the Switch 2's increased power over the Switch 1, but we'll have to wait and see what they do. But, you know, I think a lot of people are probably wanting that title on a Switch 2, but again, there needs to be just that question on its own posed to Yoshi P and see what happens. But yes. So the next question is a game called Clair Obscur Expedition 33 that has a lot of critical acclaim and successful sales. One of the things that stood out about this game was its turn-based combat. Expedition 33 was inspired by games like Final Fantasy and Persona. I know that you said in the past that Final Fantasy XVI's more action-based combat was sort of a natural progression or way of keeping up with modern gaming. But with the success of Expedition 33, do you think that possibly mainline Final Fantasy games could go back to being turn-based, as that seems to be something that players have an appetite for? Excellent question. Expedition 33 is an incredible success. I have still got to find time to play that myself. I only played a little bit of it as a bit of a demo before it released, and what I did play was excellent, but I need to find the time for that. I've been ill, only just back, but yeah, it does look like something that took the world by storm. I think most people will agree with. Yoshi P says, with this question of turn-based versus action, it tends to isolate the gameplay to just the battle system. That doesn't take into account what kind of game the creators want to deliver to players. For example, based on a certain graphical quality we want to present to our players, or the narrative we want to deliver to our players, it relates to how we set up the game systems around it. This includes the battle system, game design, and gameplay feel. It's not a clear-cut answer, whether it will become all turn-based or if it's going to become more action-based. He says, I'm not necessarily going to be working on Final Fantasy XVII, so we also don't want to obstruct or limit our future director or whomever will be producing the games like 17 or even 18. We don't want to put them on a rail, end quote. So basically, they're not going to say for certain. I did see on some other posts, citation needed, I can't remember exactly where, but Square Enix were very, very interested in Expedition 33, and I think there was a lot of interest in pursuing a similar game like that. And a lot of people that I've talked to have said Expedition 33 is a Final Fantasy game without the title. It was that successful and a lot of people love it. So it would be surprising to see, if they don't at least develop some kind of game that direction. A lot of people seem to be in the impression that there's not really any turn-based RPGs these days, or, things like that. I still think a lot of people missed out on the Octopath Traveler and Octopath Traveler 2 and games like that, because in my opinion, Square Enix has been making, or at least publishing, Final Fantasy games that are basically turn-based for the longest time without stopping, even if they don't have a Final Fantasy, name or tagline. Definitely check out some less, mainline RPGs. You'll be very impressed, especially with Octopath. I love that series. But it would also be interesting to see what they do for the next Final Fantasy, or maybe just have Final Fantasy 17 as a turn-based game and then Final Fantasy 18 as something completely different. I used to love Square Enix's approach to game development, where they would take risks and, throw the spaghetti at the wall and see what sticked, what's good, what's not so good. And I liked that, honestly. I mean, it meant that we had a lot of very interesting ideas, some better received than others, but I did prefer that, I think, personally. I like seeing lots of different games come out, stuff like Triangle Strategy, and remakes and remasters are okay to some degree, but it is fair to say we need some new IPs, and some new, if there's a new Final Fantasy game, since it's separate, something different. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see what the future holds. Next we have, what plans do you have for Final Fantasy XIV after Dawntrail last year? Where do you want to take the game, or what are some thematic ideas you'd like to explore? This is a good question. To share about our creative process, Yoshi P says, the team and I usually plan very far in advance. Right now we're in expansion 7.0, Dawntrail, but we already have a general idea of plans up to 10.0. We're working towards a framework that we have built for ourselves. That being said, we also have our story from the original 1.0 Final Fantasy XIV through our previous Endwalker expansion 6.0, and that's not going away. That's still going to be there. From a general perspective, we will take Dawntrail as our next roller coaster. There's going to be lots of ups and downs and exciting stories that you can expect out of this and future releases as well, end quote. The thing to take from that is that they have generalized plans up to 10.0. Usually with Final Fantasy XIV, you have the general plan set, as we saw up to Endwalker expansion from 1.0, or at least the Realm Reborn, where the idea was that 10-year saga, and supposedly Dawntrail is the start of another 10-year saga. It's got a long way to go, I think, to have that kind of basis set in, from at least my perspective. I've seen a lot of other people be even more critical than that, and that's fair. So we'll have to see what happens, but it's interesting to know that they've at least planned storyline, or at least an idea of what we're doing up to 10.0, which gives me greater confidence when it comes to 8.0. I think a lot of people who are currently unsubscribed from the game are very much looking forward to the expansion to see what happens to possibly return, and I think that's the general feel of Final Fantasy at the minute. You've got people who are playing still right now, like myself, that are enjoying it, but, probably less so than previous expansions, to be fair, based usually on the storyline and MSQ, things like that, less on the content delivery, and a lot of people are looking forward to 8.0, so hopefully we've got a nice, tasty expansion next, fingers crossed. During your panel, the interviewer says you cited a bunch of movies, TV shows, and manga that you were inspired by. Do you have any books that you're inspired by that aren't manga? Yoshi P says, in the fantasy category, I remember when I was in middle school and I read through the Lord of the Rings series. Amazing. I mentioned Mr. Romano's artwork and the illustration that he did for Vampire Hunter D. Do you guys remember that? Wow, that was quite a while ago. That was for the novel series written by Hideyuki Kikuchi. Probably butchered that name. And that's another title that I read even to this day. He says, I love mystery novels. I tend to lean towards Japanese mysteries, but for those that are known in the West, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes is a great series. I've read all of Agatha Christie's mysteries, and I would highly recommend those authors. Into the murder mysteries. Fantastic. Aside from Dragon Quest, Final Fantasy, and most recently Fantasia and Neo Dimension, are there any other Square Enix IPs that you'd like to work with? Yoshi P says, I don't have any specific IP to actively pursue. It might be because of my work style. If a company requires me to work on a certain title or franchise, I will give it my all. That said, if I were to explore other options, perhaps creating an original IP might be interesting. We recently announced Killer Inn. Just for context, if people don't know what that is, it's basically kind of like an Among Us, murder mystery, Cluedo kind of thing. That kind of multiplayer sort of game. You can find a trailer on YouTube for Killer Inn. Looks interesting. I need to see more personally. He continues, but Final Fantasy 11 and 14 are our primary online games. I want to explore another online game that's not Final Fantasy 14, end quote. It'd be interesting to see how well Square Enix could make a new MMO that's not tied to Final Fantasy and see where that could go. I would be really interested to see that, especially in without the limitations of an entire franchise being, relied upon, where you've got set things that you need to have in it, set goals. It'd be interesting to see what Yoshi P and his selected team would be able to push out. I'd love to see that, especially after we've seen games like Expedition 33, which, to be fair, are single player games, but to see them take something that might be a dated concept, or people might think it's a dated concept, like turn-based games, and then be hugely successful with it. It'd be interesting to see what kind of things you could do as a new MMO, basically, with that kind of traditional Square Enix development focus. But, because a lot of the games that I've played, mostly from Western developers that are MMO-based, sort of gameplay, not as interesting as I thought they would, and obviously there's the cash shop side of things. So yeah, I'd love to see a new IP personally. What lessons did you learn from the development and release of Final Fantasy XVI that you can take with you to the next Final Fantasy game, says the interviewer. Yoshi P says, there's a lot, but if I was to pick one, we were able to learn how to produce a high-end video game. There were a lot of learning parts through that, and I feel like we gleaned a lot of know-how through the process. I want to challenge myself or apply to future works on how we can swiftly produce something of high quality and minimize the development period without lowering the quality. So, end quote there. The focus on trying to push out a very successful, high quality video game, but without, years in development. I suppose that comes with developing more projects. The only way that you get faster with the development process is to have the same team, right, and apply tried and tested formula that you've worked on. I think it's probably a lot more difficult for Yoshi P and the team, at least from my perspective, for Final Fantasy 16, simply because that's a single player game, whereas previously a lot of the team presumably have worked on a lot of MMO based stuff, right? I know they had a lot of people who worked on Devil May Cry and things like that who were on the team, but to synergize with both sides of that, I think it's one of those trial and error things, right? You'll probably see that if Yoshi P does get another IP, another Final Fantasy game, I think that would be really beneficial because they've learned from that and they'd be able to provide a much better experience in a new game based on that. But whether or not we see another Yoshi P helmed video game, is anyone's guess at this point. And then finally, we got one last question, which is slightly interesting. It says, I've read an interview with Hideo Kojima, obviously of Death Stranding and Metal Gear fame, where he reflected that he might only have a few games left in him. Where do you see yourself in the next 10 years? What do you want to accomplish before you leave Square Enix or leave the video game industry altogether? End quote. I don't know if that's just me picking up on that, but I don't know. Before you leave Square Enix. That seems very definitive. Anyway, Yoshi P says, I never really envisioned myself having that sort of aspiration. No, where do I see myself in 10 years? I'm a big fan of Studio Kara, he says. You see Hideaki Anno or Kazuya Tsuramaki, and then and they're much older than me. Hayao Miyazaki is much older than I, but he's still creating. They're still producing works. Another example would be Ridley Scott. He's 87 years old and he's still working. Compared to them, he says, I am still very green. I still have a lot more to go. I will continue to work as I can't think of retirement or leaving the games industry, end quote. And that's the end of the interview. Yeah, I mean, I would love to see more than 10 years of Yoshi P. Like he says, there's quite a lot longer. I think it's definitely apparent in Japanese culture to work longer, isn't it? I don't have any proof or stats to back that up, but the work ethic is, you have a long way to go before you retire unless you've done something terrible, pretty much. And if you have a passion still, I mean, Yoshi P seems like the sort of person, at least from when I've met him in person and also from the online presence, that very much is passionate about chasing, the next game and trying to do what they can. And I think that applies to everybody who works at Square Enix and at least Creative Unit 3. You've got people like Masayoshi Soken who create wonderful pieces of music regardless of in real life situations that ordinarily would put people completely out of an industry, but it's their passion that drives them forward. And I would personally love to see, another 20, 30 years of Yoshi P in the team putting out new games, but I guess it is a fair point, I suppose. But yeah, from this, mostly I got that they have plans up to 10.0, which we kind of already guessed, but it gives me a little bit more confidence towards 8.0. I think a lot of people who have unsubscribed from the game are waiting for that expansion and announcements of what will be in that expansion, and that's totally fair. I think Dawntrail did, as they said, it's an up and down roller coaster. I think there might have been more downs than ups. Not necessarily towards the content actually put out. I think the content itself has been some of the best they've put out, personally, at least in my opinion. The variety's good. There's a good amount of it. Maybe not as, close together as it should be, or in a strange order than I would have placed it. But at the same time, I think it was just the storyline, the MSQ, and people's desire to play through Dawntrail based on those things that let it down, right? So it'll be interesting to see where we go for 8.0. Personally, I want to go to Mericidia and have a Cryal storyline. That would be great, just to have a full Cryal, it's Cryal the storyline with us as the main character again. I think that's another thing, but yeah, interesting little interview. If you want to go support this, obviously by George Yang over here on Anime News Network, a link will be in the description. Obviously they did this fantastic interview, so thank you to them. And if there are any more interesting tidbits that come out of Anime Expo or any other interviews, I'll be sure to put them up, read through them, so that if you're on a long road journey or wherever you're going, or if you just want to play games and listen to somebody ramble, that's the sort of video content that this is. But very cool, very interesting points, and yeah, hopefully there's some future for Final Fantasy XIV that's nice and strong. And I really like the idea of a new IP, especially in an MMO space from Square Enix. Yeah, that could be amazing. But again, will it happen? Unlikely, right? Anyway, much love. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.